Let me know when we're up. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, it needs to be a little. Oh, there we go. We're getting there. All right. Welcome. What's going to happen here tonight is I'm just going to start by saying grace and let you know, too, that this is being recorded, actually live streamed, so that people at home don't get behind us, that they know what's going on, just as everybody here knows what's going on. So this recording will be up on YouTube, so people can watch it again later, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just going to start by saying grace, and then I'm going to shut up for a few minutes, because they're going to start bringing the food out right away, first course. So I'm going to let them get some food in front of you. And once you got some food in front of you, then I'm going to get up and talk again. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Gracious God, be with us today as we hear your voice, as we discern your will, as we move as a synodal church, a communion, baptized people of faith. Draw us closer to each other on this journey, and of course, feed us, not only with your word, but with, of course, this wonderful food that you put in front of us today. May it nourish us well, to be who you call us to be, a people on mission to serve. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Okay, food is on its way. All right, everybody have some food in front of them? Do you mind if I talk to you while you eat? I mean, you don't have to stop eating. Keep eating. Well, yeah. It's almost like, don't worry about me. You know, in the we're not Benedictines, but in the Benedictine tradition, they just listen while somebody talks as they eat, or they eat and they listen, something like that. But anyway, you probably would have preferred that you ate first and then heard me talk, but maybe we'll sort that out next time. No, you just want to, okay, doesn't matter. Okay, so I just gotta question who this word synodal church. Anybody heard that word synod, synodal, synodality before? I know you've heard it before, but do you have any idea what it means? No, none whatsoever. What's that? Well, I think that's a good start. Meeting, gathering. Sorry? Together. Journey together. Right. Textbook definition right there. Journey together. To walk together, actually, but literally. We were just discussing how the word synagogue and synodal come together, to walk together. Maybe I'm going to presume this, making presumptions here, because I don't actually know that a synagogue from the same roots. The word comes from the same roots as synodal, meaning together, place to be together, journey together. Anyway, for a synodal church, so I am here to tell you today, I'm going to speak particularly about this Synod Preparatory document, which can be found at synod.va if you want to read it. I'm just going to introduce it to you today and introduce something that's happening around the world and right here. It's Synod, a Synod on Synodality. Pope Francis has launched this 3-year process, which begins in local churches and ends up, of course, with a gathering of bishops in Rome in 2023. But the whole idea is to involve everyone on this journey together. And the whole concept, the Synod on Synodality, it's kind of philosophical, right? You're kind of like, what does that really mean? So this is all part of the process, is to try to understand what it means, come to an understanding of what it means by doing it, by being together, by journeying together. And so you probably know, because we've had a number of synods in the church in the last few years, just the last 10 years, there's been a number of synods, but nothing quite like this one, because this one is an invitation to engage all of the baptized, the entire church in the process, and there is a particular emphasis in this process on those who are on the peripheries of the church. It is for the baptized and confirmed, those who are part of the church, but there is a particular intention here to hear the voices that aren't being heard. So this obviously is not easy, and in fact, if I have a criticism of the Vatican right now, it's because they got to get better at organizing synods, because our timeline is very short. It's not going to be easy for us to do it, but we're going to do our part as St. Joseph the Worker Parish, right? We're going to do our part. Good. Okay. So I want to just back up a little bit before we get into the synod that we're in, and just look at this whole concept of synodality. And where does it all come from? Well, it comes from who we are as church right from inception, right from the beginning. There was a sense that the church was a people that gathered together and they made decisions. The canon of Scripture, for example, with the Bible, where do you think that came from? It's the church that got together and decided these are the books that matter to us. These are the books that speak to us about what we believe as Christians. And from there was several gatherings, the creed. All these things come out of this process of being a church that journeys together. Okay, but the problem is, over time, we get farther and farther away from our roots, and we lose the sense of how meaningful those roots are to us. And so back in the 1950s, which was an exceptional era in church history, an exceptional era in the sense that the number of vocations in the church was at an all-time high. The church was wielding influence in the world like it had never wielded before. The church was strong. And this diplomat by the name of Pope John the 23rd became the Pope. And he said, okay, but we've come out of the Second World War. This is an exceptional time, and he could see it. I could see that the winds of change are coming. And the fact of the matter is there needed to be a reconnection with the world in which we are as church. We need some Holy Spirit in our lives, in our body. We need to reroot ourselves in who we are as Christians. So what did he do? What did Pope John do? He called together something called the Second Vatican Council, which was a gathering of all the bishops in the world at that time. In fact, if there was a Vatican III now, they would need a venue that was 2 or 3 times the size, because the church in the 1960s was really basically Europe and the Americas, parts of the Americas. Now it's global. It's just so much bigger. And, of course, we know, and this is something Pope Francis has said many times, because he believes that we're in a unique time right now, because we have on the chair of Peter someone who was formed deeply in the Second Vatican Council. He was ordained right after the council was complete. This was a part of his formation. He was deeply rooted in the council at that time, and the great hope that was in the church in that era, and a great hope in a sense of our ability to live the gospel with the help of the Holy Spirit. And so when the bishops of the world got together, 1962 to 65, they started to reflect on how to renew our self-understanding as church. Who are we as church? Now, up to that point, you would have understood, and I say up to that point because this is not reflective of the entire history of the church, but really for about a 500-year period anyway, you would have understood the church as a very clearly defined hierarchy. So you would have had the Pope on top, right? And then you'd have the cardinals, or what you'd call the curia, and then you'd have bishops, and then you'd have priests, and then you'd have lay people. It'd go down like this. It's a very, very clearly defined hierarchy. And of course, the bishops, when they gathered for the Second Vatican Council, not only just with bishops, in fact, there were representatives from other churches, there were theologians. It was a diverse gathering. Not nearly as diverse as a global synod on synodality, I might add, but we're doing right now. But they came to a self-understanding of church not as hierarchy, but as communion. That word communion is throughout the council documents. The church is a communion. You might be fooled because the documents of the Second Vatican Council use the word hierarchy a lot, but not as a definition of who we are. It's simply a statement of the fact that the church has a hierarchy, has a hierarchy at the service of the communion. So it's there at the service of communion, but we are a communion. What does it mean to be a communion? And this is a question, this is a very good question for us as church, and it's why we have a synod on synodality. Well, Francis, I started to say earlier, he's the one who says it takes 100 years to implement a council. We're only 50 years since the Second Vatican Council, so we got a ways to go. We're just starting to get the sense of who we are as a church for the world. And for the world, by the way, that's a key point in the dogmatic constitution on the church, that we exist for the world, at the service of the world. That of course, we are made aware of. So, a synodal church, then, is this church that has a self-understanding as a communion that journeys together. I'm just going to check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything important here. So we have this self-understanding as a church that is a communion according to our tradition. But how well do we understand that? How well do we understand that as baptized people, we are part of the mystery of Jesus Christ? We put on Jesus Christ, priest, prophet, and king, each and every one of us. You know, since the council, we don't re-baptize people when they enter into the Catholic communion of the church. We don't do that anymore, because there's one baptism. That's what it means to be communion. You see these little circles up there. I thought that was a good image for church as communion. I mentioned before the council, the church had this understanding of herself as hierarchy, right? The definition, more appropriately from the council, would be to look at it this way. As a communion, each and every table in here is a diocese, okay? You notice you're not on top of each other. You're just all on the same level. And the connection that you have to each other is that there's one of us going around and keeping us all together, that we're all in the same room, that we're all part of something. And strictly speaking, by the definition of the council, the church around the world is a communion in the sense that the bishops are in communion with the Pope. Okay? He's not above them. Peter and the apostles functioned in a manner where Peter was considered the first among equals. Among equals. He's not above them, but he's one of them. And it's their relationship with him that establishes their orthodoxy, if you want to say, their legitimacy and their membership in the church. But if the world around us, and I have this sense, an unfortunate sense, that the world around us doesn't perceive us this way, and it's in part because we don't do a very good job of expressing ourselves this way. We don't see ourselves this way legitimately or authentically as a communion. We very much have a clerical mentality, a mentality where it's all the priest's responsibility, it's all the bishop's responsibility. We don't have this sense that as church we share that responsibility. The way we function, our style of functioning, our way of thinking of ourselves. So it's no wonder the world around us doesn't see it. You know, just to give you an example, I watch the CBC and I'm a fan of our public broadcaster, but if you look at the way the church and the emphasis on the visit of Pope Francis has been portrayed in the media in terms of dealing with the crisis around our residential schools, as if the Pope's coming to Canada is going to solve the problems that we got to solve right here. There are problems. These are our relationships, the relationships that we have with our indigenous brothers and sisters. The church is perceived as this hierarchy with, Pope Francis affecting every single decision that's made along the way. And that's our own fault. It's our own fault as church because we don't well enough express and well enough live authentically our sense of being a church as communion. So if there is a need for a synod on synodality, a synod to reflect on our decision-making processes, how we behave as church, what is our style, what is our self-understanding, that necessity is there so that we can more authentically proclaim our mission to the world and be a more credible witness to the gospel in the world. So that's the goal. That's the ultimate goal of synodality, to express who we are as church, to be a synodal church. I'm going to take a couple-minute break so that they can bring out more food. But there's your introduction. Okay? do it as well as we could. Maybe this is just the beginning of more of a sense that we are a Cenotal church, and we can adopt these practices, that bring everyone together so that voices can be heard. The intention is that all the baptized will participate. This doesn't mean, just the baptized who are going to church every Sunday and lecturing, or all the baptized who are in the CWL or Knights of Columbus or Secular Franciscans. This means all the baptized, whether we see them or not. And it is perhaps a wonderful opportunity for us to find out, if we don't see people, why we don't see people. This is an invitation as church to do something else that the council invited us to do, and that is participate. There are many points in the preparatory document, and one point is on liturgy, of course. And in the Vatican Council's document on liturgy, it spoke of active participation, that everybody participates. You don't go to church, you don't go to Mass to simply watch the priest do a magic show. We go to church, we participate in the liturgy because we are a liturgical people, a ritual people. And the role of the community gathered is an important role. And within the community gathered, there are many important roles, in fact. The role of the lector, the role of the usher. We have the role of the live stream team, the role of, we got a lot of roles. Legitimate liturgical roles, and without them, it doesn't work. So participation, active participation, is something we're called to, not just liturgically, but in every aspect of our baptism, every aspect of our faith. Active participation in the mission of the church. And the mission of the church is no different than the mission of Jesus. What's the mission of Jesus? To proclaim the gospel. Right. It's that simple. If you're Franciscan, that's our first rule. First rule of St. Francis is to proclaim the holy gospel. In fact, the vows that I took, I vow, I'm now forgetting, put myself on the spot, to live the holy gospel of Jesus Christ. That's how it begins. To live the holy gospel of Jesus Christ in poverty, without anything of my own, and in obedience. No, I said that wrong. To live the holy gospel of Jesus Christ without anything of my own, in chastity and in obedience. Okay, there we go. That's a sidetrack anyway. It's not about me. Okay, so so synodality is journeying together. It is a matter of finding ways to journey together and living the mission. How does our journey together feed into the mission? This is one of the questions. This is the first question that comes up in the preparatory document, because before we go any further as church, we have to understand what it is we're trying to do. And one of the things ultimately that we're trying to do is be synodal, is journey together. So we're journeying together and participating in the mission of Jesus. That's what we're trying to do. So we have to first and foremost identify that. But that's kind of a precursor question that's posed in the preparatory document. The fundamental question is divided into two. The fundamental question, first off, invites us to reflect on what we are doing. And it's a positive question. How are we journeying together? What are the indications? What are the signs that we're doing some things right? And obviously we're doing some things right. And The wisdom, I think, of a question like this is because when it goes around the world, you're going to find that things are done in one part of the world that are not done in another part of the world, and there's a shared wisdom there. There's an opportunity there to share with each other the ways that we do things. So I'm just going to throw it out there to you before I give some examples. How are we journeying together? Who can come up with an example? Maybe just turn to your table, take 2 minutes, and discuss that question. How are we journeying together? Okay, the food is starting to arrive. It looks like you're having some wonderful conversations. I know there's some brilliant insights out there, and somebody, you know, there's got to be at least 3 or 4 people who really want to share this wonderful insight that came out of their table discussion on how are we journeying together. How are we journeying together? You tell the rest of us. Okay, so a start is journeying together. An example of journeying together is that we're coming to church. We gather around the table of the Lord, the Eucharistic table. We're doing it. Okay, we're doing it in the sense that we're worshiping together. Yes. Okay. Anything else? Are there any other ways that we're journeying together besides coming to Mass? Oh, John, I know you've got some brilliant insights over there. How are we journeying together?
In this parish, we have something that I've discovered. I've been in all the parishes and couldn't see. In this parish, in this parish, when I came here first, I was reached out to by the people here who I want to know our name. They wanted to know who we were, and then I was involved with St. Vincent de Paul, worked to the whole Fraser Valley, and I found that without the congregations of each church, we could not survive. So that's how we're journeying together. Each one of us takes a good part in the ones we helped.
Very good. Thank you. How are we journeying together?
Well, in our table, across what we're saying about, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. But we were sharing as mothers how for us sometimes it can be hard, and that we should start at home. Is the first church, as we know. But how we, as Catholics, should be, sharing the good news. Personally, as we were mentioning, that is not in us to really go and talk to a stranger, hey, Jesus loves you, which are the good news. But we were agreed that sometimes we said that if we are interacting with somebody and we heard that they're going through some hardship, then we said, I'll pray for you. And that is some kind of connection, saying, you know what? I'm going to be there with you and walk with you in whatever you are going through.
So we journey together when we are intentional about it. It's what I heard there, is when we recognize people are suffering and we intentionally choose to journey with them. The fundamental question I mentioned has 2 parts. How are we journeying together? But what steps does the Spirit invite us to take to grow as a synodal church? Fundamentally, the question recognizes that even though there are ways that we do journey together, there are many ways that we don't. We don't go far enough. We are not the synodal church that we want to be. There is an invitation to go further, and it's only the Spirit that can take us there. There is a sense that we want this fresh air, this newness, a different way of doing things, And I don't know about you, but I believe, I'm very hopeful about this, because I, as a Christian, as a believer, I want us as church to make an effective impact on the world around us, in the world in which we are. I want us to be a church that grows. You know, I go back, I always look at it down through history. You look at in the early church, the church grew fast because the proclamation was authentic. It was real. It was tangible. You could just pull it out of the air. The Franciscan order was the same way, right in the early years, in the first 40 years of its history. It grew to be like over 100,000 members real fast, because that witness, that testimony to an ideal was strong. And of course, what happens though, for various reasons, we get tired. And we get tired, and we need this renewal of our sense of identity and mission. And our identity and mission are very much wrapped up in each other. Our want to go further as a synodal church. So this is an opportunity to reflect on what steps we can take. What steps does the Spirit invite us to take to grow as a synodal church? It's the fundamental question. I will give you an opportunity to discuss it at your table, but we're going to be discussing it formally, these and other questions, in gatherings in the future. So this is the plan that the church has for this 3-year process. The first phase is the diocesan phase, the local church phase. So in this first phase, which begins now, it really ends in April, and do you know what it really actually means? This may be extended, but from what we know so far, it actually means that the archdiocese has to have their report sent in. Every bishop in the world is going to send in a report after the process happens in his diocese. It's a 10-page report which reflects all of us. We're talking 400,000 Catholics, okay? Are you with me? Do you believe me? I think I'm making up stories? Okay. I know it sounds unreal, but it's real, okay? They have to submit their report by in February, the month of February. And then it goes to the National Conference of Bishops. And the National Conference of Bishops, they submit a report from their information gathered and their discussions. And then it goes to a continental phase where it is discussed as the continent of North America, for example. And then it goes eventually to the Synod of Bishops in Rome, which will be in October of 2023, and that's usually a gathering of bishops and some other select invités. About 3 weeks, a three-week gathering. And they usually produce a document. And from that document, usually the Holy Father will produce another document. There has been suggestion, however, that this time around, instead of going straight to the Pope, that the final document from the Synod of Bishops in 2023 will come back to us. It'll come back all the way to the local churches, and we'll do this all over again. We'll have the opportunity to go through it and give our own feedback on it. You know what? All of this says that there's a desire here to recreate ourselves, reinvent ourselves, so to speak, into this real, credible testimony to the world of what we believe. Real, credible testimony of the mission of Jesus, which is the mission of the church. This is our invitation through this process, and it's a powerful one. So I'm going to take a little break, but I'm going to leave you back with these fundamental questions to discuss. What steps does the Spirit invite us to take to grow as a synodal church? So you can take a few minutes to discuss that second half of the fundamental question, and I'll catch my breath. So when we look at the second half of the fundamental question, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road. It's kind of, we're sort of leaping right to changes in the way we function. And so we're not doing a particular listening session tonight where we're going to start writing things down and taking notes and all that. We're going to do that in the future. Would be curious to hear, nonetheless, if there were any brilliant ideas that or things that came up at the tables in terms of addressing this question. What steps does the Spirit invite us to take to grow as a synodal church? Maybe it's not as clear of a question as I'm perceiving it to be. You might read it differently. So, does anybody have anything to share on this second question? Okay, that's okay. You got distracted. All right, so I will come back to it. Don't worry. I'm just going to go through, just so you know that I'm not making this stuff up. I've got 8 quotations here from the document. So they're kind of wordy and heavy, but I just, want you to know. We're talking about a synodal church in form, style, and structure. And these are the 8 objectives of a synodal church, which touches on how we behave, I guess that would be style, but of course how we are structured, and in the way we go about things. The objectives, in terms of the form, style, and structure of a synodal church, are to recall how the Spirit has guided the church's journey through history and today calls us to be together witnesses of God's love. Christians are witnesses. The church is founded on the testimony, that is the witness of the first people who witnessed, see the resurrection, all right? And witnessed to it by living what they believed from it, what they drew from it. And just to give you a little scriptural example there, if you look at the stories of Jesus on the cross, Jesus is abandoned on the cross, right? Nobody's there. They're all gone. And yet all of a sudden, within a matter of weeks, there's all these people martyring themselves, going out there and proclaiming faith in Him, in His resurrection, to the point they're willing to die for it. What changed? Well, they witnessed His resurrection. Something changed in them. They saw it. And so they changed, and it became something profoundly implanted within them. Something that they had to testify to through their faith. They couldn't turn back. They became witnesses, and they did it together. To live a participative and inclusive ecclesial process that offers everyone, especially those who for various reasons find themselves on the margins, the opportunity to express themselves and to be heard in order to contribute to the edification of the people of God. This presumes that we can all benefit from listening. We can all benefit from hearing the voices of those on the margins of our communities. We can all benefit from hearing those who aren't being heard. So that's the invitation, to listen. The invitation to find a ways that we can hear those voices, right? It also means, as we enter into the process of discerning together, journeying together, we as we find a way to listen, we start to identify who these people are, who are on the margins. And of course, we don't really identify who the marginal humanoids or marginal Christians are until we start listening. And that's when we find out. We find out who needs to be heard. Yeah. Are you a marginal person? You want to share? I'll hand you the mic because that's all part of the process.
Set a time. We were just discussing at our table, Father. Thank you, Father Pierre. That very thing, the voice of the invisible. My name is Tim. My wife is Bernadette. We joined St. Joseph's Parish back in September. It was a pleasure joining this parish, such an open and progressive parish. We came from a parish where we had a Franciscan pastor, Father Paul Smith. And one of the things that we did back in 2010 was Father Paul sat down with me and said, we need to reach out to the invisible people who are the marginalized, who are the ones that have fallen away from the church for whatever reason. So we came up with a special event one Sunday of the month at night, on a Sunday at night. We called it the Twilight Mass. It was only called Twilight Mass in the sense that it took place late as the sun goes down. It started off as a 9 p.m. Mass. He wanted it at 10 p.m., and I thought, who's going to come at 10 p.m.? But we started at 9 p.m. It became an 8 p.m. Mass, and it stayed there. And it was never meant to be a last chance Mass. It was always meant to be a last Mass of the day. And we reached out. We reached out to students because we were in the area in West Side Vancouver. So there were a lot of students who were at university and colleges in that area. We reached out to service workers. We reached out to workers, immigrants who were working in the labor field. People came, and the thing that I want to share with you is this. There was a mother who came. She was no more than 40, 42 years old, but her teenage son had died of a drug overdose about a few months before she showed up at our church. And she showed up because a friend of hers, who is a friend of mine, who sometimes goes to church and sometimes does not, felt compelled to come to this night Mass. And at this night Mass, there was still the full Mass form, but gone was all the trappings. Gone was all the strict choreography, as Father Paul would put it, of the Mass. Instead, it was a Mass at which a person could just come and be there in the presence of God. And Father Paul had a very special gift. He would talk to many of the worshipers as they came in the door, and he would actually formulate his homily right there on the spot. And I can say that for sure because I would hear his homily early on Sunday morning, and then I'd hear the homily at Twilight Mass, and it was completely different. And if I delved into his mind, I can see that he formulated that homily to be relevant to the people who came in that door. That mother of the child who died of a drug overdose had not gone to church in over a year. She probably would not have gone back to church anytime soon, except that her friend brought her that night. And Father Paul's homily spoke to her so deeply that she kept coming back to Twilight Mass. She didn't go to any other Masses, but she kept coming back to Twilight Mass. And those are the invisible voices that we need to reach out to find. It's not a question of setting up a ministry and saying, we have the ministry. It's a question of setting up the ministry and then establishing who are the disciples who are going to go out and find those voices.
Thank you. I think that is a good addressing of that second question there. What steps does the Spirit invite us to take to grow as a synodal church, and is a tangible example of a step. Finding ways to make church accessible to people. And actually that was one of the intentions of these faith and food suppers to begin with, is to create venues for people to gather, and gather perhaps even outside of the church building, right? So there are many ways, and there are many efforts that we do take, but always could take more, and be creative about that. I think that's what the Spirit is calling us to. Recognizing and appreciating the wealth and the variety of the gifts and charism that the Spirit liberally bestows for the good of the community and the benefit of the entire human family. In the number of the letters from St. Paul, of course, we hear of the variety of gifts. The church is defined as a communion of people with a variety of gifts. There are many parts, but there are one body, and that many parts, well, they're all different. They're all different, and they're all gifted. And those gifts are particularly enhanced by the gift of the Spirit. We have to recognize, if we're a synodal church, that we're not all the same. And it's because we're not all the same that we can do this, that we can authentically proclaim the gospel as a church. If we were all the same, we wouldn't do it so well. We'd just compete with each other. But we are a diverse communion, and therefore have something very rich to share. We participate together. Complementary ways. So, exploring participatory ways of exercising responsibility in the proclamation of the gospel and in the effort to build a more beautiful and habitable world. A sense of responsibility, shared responsibility. Okay, this is key. I'm going to use the image, the word clericalism again. It should come up a few times. Clericalism has many different edges, and one of them is to say that it's all the priest's responsibility. Church is the priest's job. Nobody else has any other job. There's no other job that exists. It's just the priest. But then you got the priest, you got church, right? That's clericalism. And it's crazy. We have a responsibility together, a shared responsibility to be church. And we are invited to grow in our sense of that shared responsibility. But not just our shared responsibility to be church, our shared responsibility with the rest of the world around us to make the world a better place to be. And that's what that point is talking about. Okay. Examining how responsibility and power are lived in the church, as well as the structures by which they are managed, bringing to light and trying to convert prejudices and distorted practices that are not rooted in the gospel. I just automatically, again, clericalism comes to mind because it's a way of exercising priesthood. If a priest has a clericalist or clerical mentality, that priest will exercise his priesthood in a manner that is not authentically the gospel, and will overstep, will abuse power, will overstep boundaries, and will do all sorts of things that really have nothing to do with being a priest. You know, being ordained did not make me an expert in finances, for example. It didn't make me an expert in a lot of things. In fact, it didn't make me an expert in anything. It didn't. You know, I took some studies, but I'm not the only person in the world that's ever gone to school. You know? And I'm not the only person in the world who's ever studied theology. You know, these are the kind of things that we need to realize as church. And we need to learn how to share our responsibility for the mission because of it. Accrediting the Christian community as a credible subject and reliable partner in paths of social dialogue, healing, reconciliation, inclusion, and participation, the construction of democracy, the promotion of fraternity and social friendship. So here is where we go further in our sense that the church exists for the world. That we want to be a leaven in the world just as Jesus is, right? Just as the Spirit is. We want to be empowered to make an impact positively, socially. It's not as if we're just content to be a community that prays and minds our own business. You know? There are times, sure, when we could mind our own business a little more, sure. But no, actually, we want a relationship. We want a relationship. We want to be in relationship with the world around us, particularly with the poor and marginalized, and we want to help. And we do that when we choose to work with, when we choose a path of dialogue. We're constructive. Social dialogue, healing, reconciliation, inclusion. These are values. These are our values. Regenerating relationships among members of Christian communities, as well as between communities and other social groups. For example, communities of believers of other denominations and religions, civil society, organizations, popular movements. This synod process is also an opportunity to engage people of other faiths, and that is worked into the process. What's a little bit complicated is that in this phase of the process, from what I read in the document, I think what we're trying to do is reach the baptized and confirmed and hear their voices first. Because that's a big enough job in itself, is to reach to the peripheries of our own communities. And it's from there that the church invites the input, and of course has the dialogue with members of other churches. Not only other churches, other religions. It's where the church begins to have dialogue with other sciences, you know. There are many areas of expertise and many areas of intellectual pursuit in the world, and the church has to be in dialogue with all of these in order to proclaim something authentic. Fostering the appreciation and appropriation of the fruits of recent synodal experiences on the universal, regional, national, and local levels. One of the tables I stopped by, we were having this discussion on how it impacts us locally. Well, here's something. We go through a process here at St. Joe's. In doing this process, we will learn things about ourselves. We will learn that perhaps there are better ways that we can do some things. And we will include that in our report that goes to the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese will do its study. It will gather all of its reports from the parishes and groups and organizations, all of that, and they will make a report. But the Archdiocese will also learn things along the way about the way the Archdiocese does things. And all of it feeds into the Synod of Bishops that happens in 2023. And so there are evidently going to be changes that take place on the universal level. But locally, we don't have to wait, right? If we discover that there are things we can do differently now, if we discover that there are things that we can already do differently that we just hadn't thought of before because we didn't talk before, because we didn't have these listening sessions and opportunities, well, we can do that now. We can make those changes immediately. So this is a process that is multi-layered, and it impacts us in many different ways. And I also think this point here too is also a recognition that there's been a number of synods in the last 10 years, and there's been a lot of good insights to come out of those that really are just beginning to be realized. Is dessert coming out now? 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah, I don't want to move on to the next section yet. So what are you hearing? That's a tough question. I see, tonight you're the ones listening, I'm doing the speaking, so, I'm curious what you're hearing.
I was sharing with my friends that what we need to do, or personally what I need to do, is reach out and be out of my comfort zone as a Catholic, as a person that I feel that I'm doing all the right things. I need to stretch more. I need to really see on the areas where I feel uncomfortable. Talking to somebody and say, hey, how you feeling? Do you love Jesus? Kind of a way of, being a little bit politely, but wondering what's in that person's heart, and see if they possibly feel lonely and they really want to chat a little more deeply about their relationship with Jesus.
Thank you. What are we hearing? Cheryl, what are we hearing? Well, what is this process calling us to? What are we hearing this evening? Okay.
Calling us to get to know each other better. It's calling us to get to know each other better.
We are being called to get to know each other better. I'd say that's a very wonderful, simple insight. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and you don't think of these things, but it's true. So, do you got an answer now, Cheryl? Okay. This table have any wonderful thoughts? Tony, you hear lots of things, I know.
No, I think for me the word that stands out is listening. I think listening to each other, listening to those on the margins. I think it's going to be really important for us to, Sister Cecilia was mentioning, listening to understand rather than necessarily listening to respond. So really to have that dialogue and just to take in what the what the individuals are telling us about the various questions that we're going to be discussing. So just the listening process, I think, is going to be really important.
Thank you. We're hearing that we have to listen. It's a very good insight. It's very true. Okay, John. You're going to have to talk right into the mic, though.
Okay. I'll stand on my feet for this one. What we are called to do is be vulnerable. It's vulnerable in knowing ourselves, not just other people, because every single person wears a mask throughout life. They build that mask from childhood, And it's not reaching out on who we actually are. We know our names, we know our jobs. But do we know who we are? And if we know who we are, then we'll be able to reach out in understanding to other people. So we are called to, I would say, get into the practice of love, which is called real charity. And if we are vulnerable, the other person will be vulnerable too. It's easier for a woman than it is for a man, I know. So that is what I'm hearing from it. We're called to be vulnerable.
Thank you. Okay. So, when I read the preparatory document, I just started jotting down when I was done the words that stood out to me. And this is a list that I made. They're words that you're going to hear over and over again throughout the process. The first one is inclusion, because it is clearly indicated over and over and over again that this process is meant to be inclusive, that we are to reach far to try to include, to hear, to listen to voices that feel excluded or for whatever reason are not being heard. So inclusivity is key. It's a key concept, and just might mention too that since we did a bit of a process here a couple years ago at St. Joseph the Worker, when we reflected on the joy of the gospel, we identified being an inclusive community as our first priority as a parish. So we got a bit of a start on this. At least we understand what the word means, right? Not to say that we have a full understanding of what the word means, because we could always grow. And that's where you get to the last word on there, conversion. But we'll come back to that. Listening. It's all about listening. Synodality is about listening. And I'm thinking of a story. It was a story. Mother Teresa did an interview with an American reporter once, and she was asked a question about her prayer life. And she said, the reporter says, how do you pray? And she said, well, I talk to God. And says, well, what do you say? The reporter says, what do you say when you talk to God? Oh, actually, she says, I don't say anything, I just listen. And then the reporter says, well, what does God say when you talk to God? Oh, God doesn't say anything, God just listens. So imagine two people just listening to each other. That's prophetic church. And if we can get there, it's amazing. It leads us to encounter. It leads us to encounter the other and respect the other for who the other is. To encounter the other as they are, in all their beauty, created in the image and likeness of God. We remember every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. Do we recognize and are we daring to encounter the other as the image and likeness of God? Every human being, even those who stink. You know what I mean? That's where inclusion and a sense of really appreciating the wonder of God and what God does. Willing to include, listen, and encounter the other for the beauty that they are. And that's everyone, okay? I don't need to get into specifics. We'll get there. We'll get there when we get into the questions. Clericalism is a word that you will find throughout the document, and it's gonna come up throughout the process, because this whole idea of synodality is based on the assertion and presumption that we're a bit clerical as a church. that we're a little, maybe way too clerical as a church, that we don't really have a very healthy sense of our shared responsibility. And we see how that plays out and how it affects us internally and externally, how we're perceived by the world around us. It's not good. There's nothing good about it. And when we talk about clericalism, it leads us to recognize that half of the church, at least half of the church, has a voice that isn't being heard enough, at least not enough. That's women. That's at least half the population there. The document talks about the voice of women quite a bit and points the church to a reflection on the voice of women. And I was reminded of this today. I think it was, there was something that came out a few years ago. It might have been even the last synod's final document, where the synod spoke about respecting the role of women in the church the way Jesus did. And that's an invitation to us to get to the point where we value women the way Jesus did. Value the voice of women in our style, in our structures, in our form. Pope Francis has used, he said that wherever decisions are made, women should be present. This is a work in progress. Clericalism is exclusive, okay? That's where and it works both ways. It's not just the priest trying to exclude, it's also the priest being placed on a pedestal where he can be knocked down or blamed for everything. That's not church. It's not healthy church, and it works both ways, okay? There has to be a way to bring women into decision-making processes and so that women are heard and respected. The document, just to go a little bit further on this, references a couple examples. There were two things that Pope Francis did in the last couple of years. He opened up the role of, officially opened up the role of acolytes to women so that women are no longer prevented from being near the altar, okay? And the role of lectors. Now in practice, here in Canada, it hasn't been really an issue. I mean, we don't function that way. But it is nice to know that the law is catching up. And not only that the law is catching up, but inviting us to go further. So the Canadian bishops, in fact, now have it on their desk to reflect on how to officially install, how and when, and what that process would be to officially install women as lectors and acolytes, which would be a new thing because up till now, even though all kinds of people read at Mass, even though all kinds of people altar serve at Mass, the only ones that were officially installed as lectors and acolytes were those in the seminary. There were men in the seminary. That was it. So giving that ritual recognition to lay women and men is a step. It's a step, and perhaps there are steps we can go further. Perhaps a few come to mind. I'm not going to be suggestive. I could be, but I'm holding myself back. I'm here to listen, right? Okay. We can all think of ways that we could bring women into the decision-making processes in the church and support the essential role that women play in the proclamation of the gospel. But it takes discernment. Listening and discernment are the Sides of the same coin. Oh my. What is wrong with my computer? Okay. Discernment. All of this suggests that we got to be patient. We got to be patient with each other, patient with the process. We got to be faithful to the process. We got to be open to the Spirit. And, you know, we live in a world that has a lot of polarizations. And I would say, it's fair to say, we're learning that every system, decision-making process in the world has its flaws, including democracy. Okay, democracy is a wonderful system, but democracy has plenty of flaws. And more we're seeing democracy being abused. The church has an opportunity to show that there is a way that is inclusive, but also open to the Spirit, to the authentic discerning Spirit, where we're truly listening and respecting each other before jumping to conclusions. I'm not a Jesuit, so I don't know that much about discernment, to be honest. As a Franciscan, we just make decisions, and then we look behind us to see what happened. Try to deal with the consequences. But there's something we can all learn here. Learn about discernment, which involves prayer. Prayer and conversion. When we speak of conversion in the context of synodality, we're not speaking of reaching out to people so that we could change them. We're speaking of our own invitation to change our own perspective. To change our own perspective because we've been listening. And one of the marvelous things that can happen through this process, if we're truly listening, is we could get behind things that we never would have supported before. Simply because we start to see it differently. We start to hear someone explain why it is they believe so strongly about something. You know, Tim's story, for example, talking about that mother who was changed by her experience. We hear stories like that and we go, hey, you know, that makes sense. Oh, just use the example. When Stephanie Nomalini stood up 2 years ago when we did this process, and she said we need to do more work to support our LGBT community. The parish got behind it. Many of us would have never thought of that before, thought that was important before. But we got behind it as a faith community because we start to see things differently. Hey, this makes sense. It all fits together. The conversion is the key piece to it. At the end of all this, if we're part of the process, we buy in. We buy in because we've been with it all along the way, but we're willing to change. Ultimately, it's about conversion. And that's just the beginning. These are the key things, the key words that I pulled out of it. You are welcome to read the document and read whatever you can on it. The hope of the Vatican, is, of course, is that everybody reads before they come to these gatherings. Everybody reads. I know it's not realistic, but you know, the more we are informed, the more we allow ourselves to be informed, the better we can participate. So this is what's coming up, okay? So on November 20th, on a Saturday, some of the ministry leaders and group leaders have been invited. In fact, they've been invited, and they've been invited to send a delegation of 3 people each, so that we could get a group of people together to start the process. So they're gonna come, and there's a whole list of questions that is going to be put in front of them. And I'm not going to get into the questions here today. I'm going to get into the questions with all of you on December 5th. Okay, so a month from now, come back for supper again, and we'll get into the questions. What we're going to do is there's 6 questions. We'll do 3 at the next session and 3 in January. And we'll have these discussions at tables. We'll take notes. We'll submit the notes, and we'll go from there. Pretty awesome? Yeah? You excited? Okay. There's going to be another aspect of this too, of course, and it's finally the individualized electronic questionnaire. We can put that out there in due time to reach those who simply are not going to come and participate in the process this way. We were talking about this at the level of the parish council, and of course, one of the things we realize is that when a group of people gets together and speaks as a group of people, that's got a bit of weight to it, right? So an individual's personal rant may not bear the same weight as something that comes from a group of 10 people. That said, we do have that calling, that sending to reach out to people who are not here, to reach out to our friends who are marginal for whatever reason. So we want to hear those voices, and we want to create processes so that we can hear those voices. So mark the dates down for the Faith and Food Suppers coming up, one in December and one in January, and I look forward to journeying with you through it. Journeying together. Any questions? You had your dessert? Did you get your dessert? You had it already? Okay. I just talked right through supper. That's okay. You're all full now. So thank you. That's all I'm going to say. God bless you. Have a good night. Amen.